My name is Emily. I've worked the night shift at a 24-hour diner just off a long stretch of highway in rural Montana for about 2 years. It's the kind of place where the only customers between midnight and dawn are truckers, lost tourists, and the occasional sketchy drifter. I used to enjoy the quiet until one night last November, when something happened that made me quit the job for good. It was a Tuesday. Around 2:30 a.m., the place was empty except for me, my coworker Lisa, and an old trucker in a flannel jacket eating in the corner booth. Lisa was in the back washing dishes. I was by myself alone at the front counter. A snowstorm was picking up outside and the road had gone completely silent. No headlights, no passing cars. Just endless dark wilderness stretching for miles. When I was making coffee, I heard footsteps on the icy pavement outside. I glanced up at the front door. Through the fogged-up glass, I saw a man standing in the parking lot. He wasn't walking toward the door, just standing there, watching. The diner was brightly lit inside, but outside, it was nothing but darkness and falling snow. I could barely make out his face, just the outline of a tall figure in a long coat. His breath fogged in the cold air, but he didn't move. I waited for him to step inside, maybe shake off the snow and ask for a coffee. But he didn't. He just stood there. I glanced over at the trucker, wondering if he noticed, but he was focused on his plate. Finally, I cleared my throat and called out. I asked if he was okay. The man tilted his head slightly. And then, he smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was slow, deliberate, like he knew something I didn't. I felt a shiver creep down my spine. Then, without warning, he turned and walked away. But he didn't leave. He walked around the side of the building. I lost sight of him for a moment. But then, a loud, heavy knock on the back door. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Lisa came rushing out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She looked scared and told me there's a guy outside. He just knocked on the back door. Lisa frowned. We don't get customers at the back door. Another loud knock, harder this time. Then, silence. Lisa grabbed a kitchen knife and slowly crept toward the back entrance. She peered through the small window, then turned back to me, whispering, "No one's there." I walked over, heart pounding, and looked for myself. She was right. The back alley was empty. But just as I exhaled in relief, the power cut out. The diner went pitch black. The only light came from the dim red glow of the emergency exit sign in the hallway. And then, I heard breathing, right outside the window. Lisa grabbed my wrist. We're locking the doors. I didn't argue. We bolted the back door and rushed to the front entrance. The trucker was still there, now looking up, confused. What's going on? He asked. I didn't have time to answer. Lisa reached the front door first, gripping the lock. But then she froze. Her face went pale. Do you see that? She whispered. I turned slowly, and my stomach dropped. The man was back, standing just outside the glass. Only this time he wasn't alone. 2 other figures had joined him. One was shorter, hunched over, wrapped in filthy rags. The other was tall with impossibly long arms, fingers pressed against the glass. And all 3 of them were grinning. Lisa whispered, "What the hell is wrong with their faces?" Their smiles were too wide, their eyes too dark, their skin pale, almost sickly. And then, in perfect unison, they all tilted their heads. Something about the way they moved wasn't natural. The tallest one raised a hand and gently knocked on the glass. Lisa backed away. "I don't like this." The trucker stood up, pulling a knife from his jacket. He stepped forward, looking out at the figures. "Y'all need something?" he called out. No response. Then, the front door handle jiggled. Hard. The trucker didn't wait. He stormed toward the door, ready to scare them off. But before he got there, the three figures turned at the same time and ran. They ran straight into the woods, disappearing into the trees. We stood there, frozen. Lisa grabbed the phone and called the cops. When they arrived, they searched the area but found nothing. No footprints, no evidence. But the weirdest part? They checked our security cameras, and there was no footage. The cameras had glitched the moment the power went out. The footage from that night was completely wiped. But they did find a note saying, "See you again." The cops told us it was probably some prank, maybe some locals messing with us. But I knew better. In my 2 years, I'd never experienced something like that before. I threw the note in the trash and decided to quit right away. Working the graveyard shift at a 7-Eleven in Houston was never what I'd call exciting, but it paid the bills. I was used to dealing with the occasional rowdy drunk, shoplifters, and even the rare late-night creeper who'd linger a little too long in the aisles. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened that night. It was a Thursday, 3:10 a.m., and things were dead quiet. I was sitting behind the counter, half watching the tiny security monitors while sipping on a Red Bull. The lights buzzed overhead, and the only sound came from the occasional hum of the refrigerators. That's when I noticed something on the screen. A man, standing just outside the door. I hadn't heard the beep of the automatic doors opening, so I assumed he hadn't come in yet. He was just standing there, staring into the store, his face barely visible under the hood of a dark sweatshirt. I glanced up from the monitor to look at him in real life. But he wasn't there. I frowned and looked back at the screen. Still there. My stomach tightened. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was just exhausted. But when I looked up again, nothing. I exhaled, shaking my head. Just my imagination. I needed to cut back on the energy drinks. I turned my attention back to my phone, but a minute later, the motion sensor by the coffee station went off. That only happened when someone was inside. The coffee pots were untouched. I walked around the counter, trying to shake off the unease crawling up my spine. Maybe the sensor was faulty. Maybe a bug had flown past it. But as I turned to go back behind the counter, something caught my eye. The bathroom door was slightly open. We kept that door locked overnight to keep homeless people from sneaking in. I swallowed hard and walked toward it, one slow step at a time. "Hello," I called out, pushing the door open all the way. It was empty. On the glass of the refrigerated drink section was a handprint. A fresh one, smudged, greasy, and right in front of me. I hadn't heard anyone go into that aisle. I would have seen them. But before I could react, a loud noise came from the back storage room. Someone was in the store. I ran behind the counter and grabbed the baseball bat we kept under the register. My hands were slick with sweat as I crept toward the back. The storage room door was open. It had been closed all night. I reached for the handle, pushed it fully open, and immediately stopped breathing. There was a man standing in the corner, motionless, dressed in dark clothes, his face barely visible under a hood. But the worst part? I recognized him. He was the man I had seen on the security screen. The man I thought wasn't real. And now, he was in my store. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there, his head slightly tilted like he was studying me. I wanted to run. I should have ran. But my legs felt glued to the floor. Then, slowly, painfully slowly, he grinned. His teeth were rotten, yellow. Some were missing. Then, before I could process anything, he bolted, not towards me, towards the back exit. The door slammed shut behind him, and suddenly the store was silent again. I rushed over, locked the door, and immediately called the police. When they arrived, they searched the area but found nothing. No sign of him. It was like he was never really there. But I know what I saw. And before I left that morning, I noticed something else. The handprint on the fridge door was gone. But in its place, there was something even worse. The glass had been scratched. Deep, jagged grooves running down the surface, like someone had clawed at it with bare hands. I leaned in closer, my breath fogging up the glass. That's when I saw the reflection. A dark figure, standing at the very back of the store. Watching me, I spun around. Nothing. The store was empty. I don't remember much after that. Just grabbing my bag, locking up as fast as I could, and practically sprinting to my car. The next morning, my manager called me. He was pissed, asking why I had left the store before my shift ended. I explained to him what had happened last night. He didn't believe me and gave me a warning. But I had already made up my mind to quit the job.